Nice to see so many people joining us on the very last day of the Contagion Cultures session for this term. So as people join us, I think I'll just take this moment to make some opening remarks. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mabee, and I'm the director of the School of Policy Studies, and I'm delighted to welcome you into our virtual environment here today. With me is our Dean, Barbara Crow, and Barbara and I will be giving the presentation today and going through some of the things that we've learned going through the COVID-19 pandemic and our response to it. But before I start off, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm sitting here at Queen's University. I'm on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples. Now, you may be sitting on many different traditional territories. Our virtual world means that we can be scattered all around. I do hope that you'll take a moment to think about those that came and were here before us, that were on this land for time immemorial. It is our privilege to be able to meet here and to work here and to learn here in such a wonderful place. And I know that we all benefit every day from this site and this location. So please do take a moment to think about the traditional territories that you may be sitting on and the people that were there for time immemorial. The other thing I'd like to say is that this is the last of the Contagion Cultures lectures for this semester. We wouldn't really have a Contagion Cultures seminar series if it hadn't been for the tireless efforts of Professor Jen Hosek. And I believe that Professor Hosek is online. I just want to express my gratitude to Jen for the work that she did to help pull this together. This has been a really amazing series of talks. It has brought together people from many, many different backgrounds. It has given us a tremendous opportunity during an incredibly tumultuous and difficult year to connect and to build on connections and to learn from each other. I think that this is a terrific example of how we can break down barriers inside the academy, how we can bring together different disciplines in order to truly learn together. And so for Professor Hosek, I'm grateful. And to all of you who have joined one seminar or all the seminars, I'm so grateful that we've had so many people along the journey with us as we've learned. So I'm going to share my screen and get us underway. So in a moment, you are going to see our presentation. And I will remind people as we go through that we will be taking questions, and the Q&A function is right at the bottom of your screen. You can feel free to enter questions as we go, and we'll look forward to answering questions a little bit later on in the session. So this is our title screen, and I'm going to hand over to Dean Crow to take us through the first few slides.
All right, so I'm going to do a little bit of a preamble. Thank you everyone for being here, and I want to reiterate Warren's comments. Thank you so much, Jen. I think this is precisely what we should be doing at the universities, and I think the universities have demonstrated their enormous role in problematizing and problem solving around the pandemic. And this is, again, part of, I think, this important work. So what I really wanted to do is say, rename the title of the talk, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, called Leading from a Square. And the challenge that we have faced in responding to the pandemic. And so what we're going to do today is share with you kind of a case study of academic administrative response to COVID-19. And I'd also really like to do a big extend my gratitude and thank out to the team I've been working with, so many people. And I think what's really driven where we are today at Queen's has been a deep commitment to service and real responsiveness on the part of our team and trying to get back in as timely a way. But I will also share with you all the challenges and things. So what Warren and I are going to do today is share with you some of the insights around teaching, learning, research, the impact, the differential impact of COVID around research, teaching, and learning. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about who we are, what we did, the fault lines, in particularly around mental health, some of the opportunities, and some of the ways in which we've learned and responded through an assessment and evaluation conducted by Wendy Craig, and I'll talk about this. So I just wanted to begin with Dante Roy as commentary about thinking about pandemics. And when Warren first reached out to me to talk, he said, Barbara, we're going to do an academic presentation. And I said, Warren, I'm not a contingent scholar but there certainly are metaphors and properties of the virus that I'm sure many of us have taken up in trying to understand our response. So next slide. So I will say that something that served the Faculty of Arts and Science very well in responding to the pandemic was having a strategic plan. It's the first one we've had in 130 years. It was one that we started off with the faculty board. And while it's not unique in the post-secondary sector, the areas that we've identified, it certainly, we had a vision and we had these 4 elements that were turned out to be very important to us as after March 13th, when we had to start making decisions about what to do and how we were going to do it. Next slide, please. So in the face of COVID, taking those principles, we made some adjustments in recognizing that there could be longer term implications around the pandemic. And we sent out a communication at the very beginning explaining how we would, what values and principles we would take into play around making our decisions, around, of course, equity, diversity, inclusion, and indigenizing and decolonizing, although challenging to work in those spaces, that we would support remote learning that was going to be required to do, that we would have our arts and science online help with that support. They had significant expertise, so how could we draw on our strengths? And that we would look after our faculty, staff, and students. There was a real commitment and understanding that 1,000 families in Kingston were supported by the Faculty of Arts and Science, and how to minimize any furloughing. And then, of course, how do we continue to do the work of the strategic plan and use that as an anchor? Just over to Warren.
Yeah. So before the pandemic, this is essentially what arts and science looked like. I think everybody online is probably aware that arts and science is the largest faculty here at Queen's. About 60% of the university is the faculty. Over 12,000 undergraduate students, almost 1,700 graduate students in 2019-20. You can see that we have a very large international student contingent, and that, of course, is important. And we teach a lot of courses across an immense number of disciplines and many interdisciplinary areas. So a very, very complicated and large machine is essentially what the faculty is. What did we see as we went into the pandemic and as the summer proceeded? Well, we actually saw a bump in our enrollment in first year. And for those of you online that are teaching first year classes, this won't be a surprise. We saw increased enrollment because the number of students who accepted their offers here at Queen's and then chose to come to Queen's was a greater proportion than we were used to. Things weren't as predictable during the pandemic, and that was something we had to learn and to work with. We also saw a very large decrease in the number of international students that came to our university, about 350 first-year students. And that has a couple of implications. It affects our community. We are a community that values diversity and values the different perspectives that our students bring. And it is a financial implication because of the structure of tuition and the way that international tuition ties into our overarching budget. We did see very positive trends in graduate enrollment. I think a lot of people were interested in school. So these were the trends that we saw in teaching coming into or through the summer. What did we do as we went into the fall? Well, we offered a lot of courses, not quite as many courses as we'd offered the year before, but you can see that in fall and winter, we offered 660 courses, mostly in remote settings, and 86 in a true online form for about 750. In the winter, 806 courses plus 60 online courses. We have a summer semester for the first time in many years here at Queen's. We'll be offering 92 courses and 56 online courses. Again, not quite as many courses across the board as we offered in person in 2019-20, but a very, very rich selection of courses and lots of options for our students. So this is something that we're proud of, that our faculty, our teaching assistants, everybody were able to pivot and to deliver a curricula that was rich and diverse. Same thing with our graduate students, many courses offered, about the same number in fall and winter, a few more in the summer. We supported 92 embedded support staff to be able to translate best practices around remote learning and online learning. And for many of us faculty members, it was a real learning effort to be able to switch to online, to be able to work with the tools, and really to be able to build a community with our students. This is something that I think we all struggled with. I think that we saw some progress as the year went on, but a real challenge. We emphasized flexibility in how we delivered our courses and in the deadlines that were put in place. We extended drop dates in order to give our students maximum flexibility in picking their courses and choosing how their semesters would work. And we did, I think, maintain quality across the board. Our faculty really came through and delivered a rich learning experience. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we worked very closely with the School of Graduate Studies to be able to provide support mechanisms for our graduate students and to try to enrich those as the year went on. On the research side of the equation, we established a return to campus committee very early in the pandemic, and we worked with staff and faculty to process hundreds and hundreds of requests to return to campus to do work. Ultimately, we facilitated over 500 researchers, students, and staff to be on campus to carry out important research that couldn't be delayed or that needed to be addressed right away. We worked closely with the library in order to advocate for our students and for our faculty members who really need access to those facilities. It took a while to get the curbside access and to get the access that we wanted, but ultimately we saw good support on that side, and we increased the virtual meetings with a range of students, staff, and faculty. And this next slide, I think, will really emphasize some of that in terms of communication. We vastly increased the number of meetings that we set up. And we did that because the informal meetings that made up so much of campus life vanished overnight, and we had to put some structure in place in order to maintain communication. So I'm not going to read off all the numbers, but you can see that we added many more meetings around committee of departments, faculty board. We had town halls. We had meetings with alumni, with parents, with students, and we sent out many emails in terms of updates, COVID updates, in order to keep people informed. And we started to adopt new tools. A year ago, not many of us had used Microsoft Teams. I think that most faculty now have some expertise with Microsoft Teams. We've really learned how to apply and utilize these tools in our day-to-day work. I'm going to turn back to Barbara for this next section?
Yeah, so some of you may be aware that in our strategic plan, we worked with Jonathan Rose and one of his graduate students with the staff using thought exchange about how to better integrate staff into the strategic plan and some of the issues that they had raised. And with that thought exchange, we pursued this particular methodology because we'd used it in this other kind of context. But what I can share with you is Wendy Craig came to see me in the fall of 2020 to say, hey, Barbara, are you doing any assessment and evaluation of the faculty's response? And I said, I can barely make it through today, Wendy. I wasn't even thinking about it. And she said, you know what? I have a lot of experience. We have a lot of experience in the psychology department around assessment and evaluation. You've been doing this, you've got your strategic plan, you've got this methodological tool. She said, how about we bring a group of grad students who can work on a real-time, real-world issue with me, and we will do an assessment of students, staff, and faculty. And she shared a number of kinds of questions. We looked at other studies that were being doing within the institution, provincially and nationally, so that we could intersect with those. And we now have a landing page. We put the results of the her assessment and evaluation. We have rolled up some of her recommendations into our strategic plan, and a number of the insights that came from the first assessment were taken up in the winter semester. So this turned out to be an excellent project, as I said before, about the university's ability to problematize and problem solve. It was a great experience for our grad students, and it was really helpful for us in terms of assessing and evaluating our response to COVID. And so what got revealed, there were 8 areas that cut across students, staff, and faculty. And one of the top findings was the impact on mental health around supports, prevention, and intervention across student, staff, and faculty. And you can see the percentage who had their mental health disrupted. And then there were numerous things that have been done within the institution. Some have been taken a longer time to do, and certainly we have more to do, but this was one of the findings, and we tried to work on a number of things to address that. The next issue was absolutely communications. People wanted to know what was going on. We were facing lots of issues around what public health was saying. We were facing issues around central messaging. We were facing issues around faculty and arts and science. And we also were facing issues around the different understanding of the faculties, the accredited programs versus the non-accredited programs, and an understanding of how we deliver that. So we spent a lot of time trying to minimize and centralize our communications, but it came out that people wanted clear, consistent, and timely communication. So we spent a fair amount of time on how will we make sure that once a central communication came out, what did it mean for arts and science, timing, and issues like that. So we've been working on that. The other thing was that our expectations we set too high about when we could deliver, how we could deliver it, what would it look like. And I can give you an example in particular, percentage that the timelines kept shifting. And this was particularly difficult for the Faculty of Arts and Science because we do not have a lockstep program. The other faculties wanted to move later, where arts and science, I just said we had a way bigger curriculum and we had to get moving sooner than later, so that there was a lot of shifting deadlines. because we kept thinking, are we going to, this expand and contract? When are we going to come back? The other issue was around recognition and value of work. How do we understand it? How do we acknowledge it? The thing that really got exposed in the dean's office was the fault lines between the small and the large units. The smaller units were doing way more work. The infrastructure that we had available to the units was not working well. We had some staff working incredible hours, other staff who were able to manage because of the distribution of labor. We had a high turnover of staff. We have a high number of new staff in positions, and we have a flat organization with some of the staff, so it didn't allow for hierarchies or people to step in and build. So we've learned a lot about the infrastructure that we had. The other issue was certainly around EDII and working conditions, particularly for many of our staff, our junior faculty, and our graduate students who had young families. We had issues around technology and access to technology. We had issues to what kind of spaces people had to work. We had to work from. All of these were interacting and intersecting. We had, of course, Black Lives Matter happen in March, this incredible, visceral and event that intersected with many of the inequalities and inequities of the pandemic, and increasing the stress load and space and understanding and content, many issues around that also happened. And so we heard a lot about the increase of high workloads, time pressures, and challenges of managing remote work. And then finally, what people really wanted was connectedness and community. How did we provide community in the remote space? How did people get access to professional development? And how people could still feel part of something that is crucially and critically part of the Queen's University, which is their community, and how did we reproduce that? How did we create that? How did we facilitate it? And then finally was access to the university. Who was going to get access? There were lots of issues around the wet labs, issues around the archives, the library, where many of our students address, where many of our students go in the particular living conditions that they have. The library was a space that they did a lot of their research, and now that we had restricted that space, the athletic space that was restricted. So there were all kinds of issues for us around how do we negotiate, who's going to get access, how are they going to get access, what is that going to look like? And then I see somebody's raised a question about the long-term COVID syndrome, and I do think it's really important, and I meant to say this in my opening remarks, that we easily are going to have a decade impact on our undergraduate, graduate student population, staff and faculty who have been impacted by currently right now 16 months of isolation. And we really are going to need to be intentional about what that means, what that looks like. And I liken it to my grandparents grew up during the Depression, impacted their whole life, how they viewed money. And I think we need to be, again, much more intentional around understanding the flow through and impact of at least a decade of our undergraduate and graduate students. Okay, so over to you, Warren.
Yeah, so this is going to be our last slide, and we will open up. I do see a number of questions starting to pop up. What did we learn as we walk away? Here's some five high level sort of thoughts to get our conversation going. We learned quite a bit about remote tools, and we didn't really know what they were capable of prior to COVID. They were not used to anything like the degree that we're using them now. And we really didn't have a strategic plan for how we were going to incorporate them. Now we absolutely need that. these tools will not go away after the pandemic is gone. There's some tremendous things about them that we want to harness. We want to support our in-person learning. We do want to come back to in-person learning, but these tools are going to be valuable. We need to figure out how to use them and how to best use them. Mental health, what Barbara was saying is exactly right. We don't see this as being a one-off. We do see this as having a long-term impact on our students, on our staff, on our faculty, our whole community. We know that change is difficult, and something that a lot of people haven't thought about that much is that changing back to in-person is just as much of a change as going online in the first place. And so we need to start preparing now for what that will look like. And we are trying to put supports in place. At least we can see this coming. Whereas when the pandemic hit, it hit so fast, there was very little time to organize the kind of supports that, in hindsight, we would have loved to have had in place. Communications, what we're finding is that our reliance on email and websites, although it's great, there are definitely shortcomings there. There are problems with the way that we communicate. In a way, there's too much information coming out. It's sometimes hard to sift through. We need to train ourselves to make use of some of the other tools that are available. I talked earlier about Microsoft Teams or Zoom like we're using now. Well, there's a lot of different ways for us to communicate, and we need to be using those tools more effectively going forward. Systemic issues, our entire institution is set up in a way that sees a real disproportionate balance of resources and support. We need to address that, because what we saw as we went through COVID is just how much some units and some individuals struggled because there simply weren't as many support mechanisms in place as there were in other places within the university. And this is something that we have control over. This is something that we can influence, and certainly we're looking to make improvements there. And then finally, the provincial or national sector. Barbara, maybe you want to speak to this.
Yeah.
This is something you saw.
Yeah, so something that I also chair the Ontario Council of Deans, and certainly when COVID first happened, everybody was sort of looking, what are other universities doing? And I really think there was an opportunity for more collaboration across the institutions, at least provincially, where we saw, for example, I think UBC has done some interesting things that they did sector-wide around the pandemic that in Ontario, many universities had individual, some are going to use pass-fail grades, some are going to do that. I think we had a moment that we didn't take advantage of about how we could have worked together. Every university reproduced guides, every university did RFPs for technology. I think we could have created a stronger university community and distribute some of the labor around some of the tasks. So I think there was an opportunity for us to do more collaboration across the sector.
That's great. So this is the end of our formal presentation. It's about 4:30, which gives us about 30 minutes for discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can go back to seeing each other a little bit better. And I am going to turn us over to our Q&A. We have 4 questions in there, but for those of you online, you can feel free to post things and to get some questions into our discussion. So let's start off with what Craig has posed, which is, knowing what we do today, what should we have done differently? Notwithstanding that there were many unknowns this time last year. Barbara, do you want to start, or would you like me to start?
I just want to say that's a great question, because certainly I will tell you that Wendy's assessment and evaluation has been really helpful in trying to get us to focus on what we didn't do well and what we could do better, because it's certainly my position that the pandemic is going to be with us longer than a lot of our optimism currently. So knowing what we should have done differently, but what became really clear to me was that I would have liked a more centralized, and again, I think this reflects many things about Queen's, more centralized commitment to what we were going to do. Because at first it was central, no, faculties, do what you want to do, and like we are interconnected. So I think having a more, like, it took the university a while to figure out what kind of system to get in place to coordinate. So I think having some kind of coordinating, even when it happened, I even said to our team, so what's our emergency plan? Where is it? So I think that kind of structure to coordinate communication and decision making, who's going to do what and how the information can flow back and forth. I think communications, this is something that I would think a lot more about and make more central. I don't know, what, Warren?
Yeah, I mean, it is a wonderful question. Looking back, it's easy to say now, we should have come out earlier and said, we're going to remote, here are the support mechanisms, let's get people trained up in May and June, rather than pushing it back a little bit. We didn't know how long things would go. In fact, those of you remembering back to last March, at first it was 2 weeks, it was a 2-week shutdown, and then it was going to be 4 weeks. And it slowly progressed to the point that, we are where we are today. I do agree that on the communications front, having a protocol ready to roll would have been good. We don't have an emergency channel to send out our messages on, and maybe we need that. We didn't have a quick way to let everybody know exactly what was going on. We relied on many different emails, town halls, website postings, FAQs. We did things through a lot of different channels.
Mm-hmm. But I can tell you, I think having the principles and our strategic plan served us really well around keeping us focused around how do we want to care for our community given this significant unknown.
Yeah, and I think that was a huge lifesaver for us, was the fact that we could fall back on those principles, and that gave us a roadmap as to how to proceed. So let's go to the next question. The next few are from anonymous attendees, so I don't know who's asking, but this is about Laurentian. If the pandemic becomes long-term, will Queen's follow Laurentian University in canceling programs and dismissal of faculty and staff?
Well, I can certainly share with you that I don't know if any of you read Alex Usher in The Higher Education Strategist. And certainly if you read Ken Steele, who does a great job on providing an overview of what's happening in the sector, that there are particular events that happened, and there's certainly a provincial response that we could have had that would have had a different outcome for Laurentian. It certainly is not the case that we are looking to do any of those things at the university. And I think that it is important for us to watch what's happening there, and it is in particularly important for us to watch. And that's the task of us as administration, is around the management of our resources and finances. But I can assure you that with the carry forward we have with the our long history and our enrollments that which drives overwhelming part of our budget are strong right now, and something we've been paying a lot of attention to during the course of the pandemic. And actually, as we know, there are not a lot of jobs out there, and so people are looking to university, and we saw a big increase in graduate applications this year.
Yeah, and I would just emphasize something Barbara said a little bit earlier. We're well aware that there's 1,000 families out there in Kingston and beyond that rely on the Faculty of Arts and Science for their livelihoods. And one of our guiding principles throughout has been to maintain that cohort of staff, of faculty, and our students. We really want to keep things whole as we go through so that we come out the other side stronger. Okay, the next question is one that we started to address, the long-term COVID syndrome that impacts education and work at Queen's. And I think we've started to address it. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, Barbara.
No, just want to say that today, Human Resources sent a message to everyone about what we're trying to do. Certainly when the COVID was happening, we were working with our director of HR and our department managers and thinking through a number of strategies around how to support mental health. Student Services was doing incredible work. I can share with you that we had a 35% increase in advising that certainly were facilitated because of the online space that became available, because we had this weird, I didn't say that out loud, we had the system before that made it a little bit more challenging for that to happen. One of the insights that we had from the work that Jonathan had done with the community assembly we started was that staff wanted to do remote work. That was something they wanted to pursue. So we've been working with Human Resources and trying to get some mechanisms in place to support remote work.
Yeah, and that's actually a really great point. It ties into the next question here about the pandemic and the long-term impact on support staff. I've spoken to a number of staff members who not only enjoy being at home, for different reasons. Sometimes they have small children, sometimes they've got elderly parents, sometimes they just like access to the garden or whatever they might have. But they find that they're very productive at home. And I know that in terms of our student services group, that we've had terrific success with advisors doing advice online rather than in person. We've been able to increase the number of students that they can see and that they can work with. So, I think that one of the long-term impacts that we might see is actually the adoption of some more flexible work approaches. Is that the right word? Something like that. Okay. Another question about online learning. How do we deal with increased student accommodations? And for those of you online that are wondering if we mean residences, I think what we're really talking about here is accommodating students that may have learning disabilities or that may have challenges with their home environment or a whole host of things. We have an accommodation system that can take that into account. So we have seen some increase in accommodations and requests for accommodations. We certainly plan to use the structures that we have in place. We found that they're really effective in order to support our students through this. Where we may run into some increased challenges as we go forward is, as we start to bring things back and we're doing more blended environment type learning, how will we, work with those accommodations then?
Yeah, I would also like to say that this is an issue. We are being challenged and there are tensions between student services and academic integrity, that there are issues around inclusive design, accommodations, consideration. We just went through the first iteration recently approved in faculty board and changing some of our appeals and processes. And this is something we have to engage with in a more intentional way, because currently it's really challenging. It's increased the workload of our colleagues. It's increased the anxiety level of our students. It's increased the staff negotiating between. And I do think that we need coming together around how to address this in in a less stressful way for all parties.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not there yet.
We're not all the way there yet, unfortunately. Hugh Siegel is writing, do we have a sense of how students in financial need of financial assistance fared during the last 2 terms, both graduate level and undergraduate level, compared to those who are in more robust financial shape?
So thanks, Hugh. We actually have done some data analysis of undergraduate and graduate students. Overall, our students, we continue to have degree completion or retention has stayed fairly high. We're one of the highest actually in the country. The Undergraduate Student Association presented at our faculty board recently and talked about the significant impact that the lack of financial resources had, particularly on BIPOC and students with accessibilities. But I don't have it off the top of my at the tip of my fingers, but I can tell you that yes, it did have an impact with those who had less financial access to resources. I can tell you that during the summer, when all of the what kind of work were students going to get, and grabbed that at least $3 million of bursary and awards were made available to undergraduate and graduate students to address that. But I can provide you with more detail. There has been an impact on that, but overall, it's not as I don't know if it's statistically significant, but certainly yes, our students who are financially disadvantaged it continued.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It exacerbated the situation for some of our students. It made it worse. The government did step in with some funding, which was very helpful for students in these predicaments, but it's an ongoing challenge. And I can tell you at the graduate level, we are looking at grad student funding and what levels are appropriate, particularly given the changing financial landscape. It's getting more expensive to live in town, and there are some challenges there for sure, Hugh. The next question is a quick one, but maybe not quick. From a grade 12 parent, will first year classes be in person or online?
The principal and the provost have made a commitment to offer as much of the curriculum in person as they can.
Yeah, and so we are timetabling as though we are coming back. We are planning to be here, and we're also watching the health landscape to see what happens, and we'll be communicating as we know.
Yeah, and we've also, I'm using the language expand and contract, and we've been trying to isolate things. So what is it that we can do that can create in-person experience for students in all years? Because all the students have been impacted by not having in-person. So we've been trying to think through how to do that.
For sure. So I hope that answers that. Scott has raised some issues. So no doubt remote has revealed some new possibilities for the use of tech. And as a communication scholar, I know the value of tech is context specific. This may not be the exact right time to ask the question, but maybe many in the virtual audience are thinking it. How do we work through the potential uses of remote software and Zoom going forward as an in-person teaching institution in a climate where the words like remote and or Zoom initiate an involuntary gag reflex? I think that's certainly true. A lot of people are quite tired of the word Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks, Scott. I smiled earlier. People might have seen me smiling because I was scrolling down the question and I saw gag reflex. I said, okay, what's that? So, Scott, I think that, we all know over 2 decades ago, the MOOCs came onto the landscape and everyone was terrified. And that's where eCampus Ontario and everything came out. And basically, what we found out was that people wanted in-person learning. Now what has happened is that every university, most universities around the globe delivered their curriculum remotely or some kind of hybrid or blended version, which demonstrated we can deliver our curriculum or parts of our curriculum, which means now universities are going to be looking differently at how they can make their curriculum accessible now that we've had such a widespread, and we've learned a lot about some of the technologies, some of the ways that work really well. So I think, it's important for us to look at what are some of those opportunities. There have been some really great tools that have emerged, and there have been some that have just not worked at all. So I do think that in person is really important. And I do think there are ways in which we can enhance some of that in-person learning and make our curriculum available in these remote and hybrid spaces. And more people now have access to critically reflect on whether they want to or they don't, or the different ways in which their pedagogy has been weakened or strengthened. And I look forward to the ways in which we can further those those ways in which we have enhanced some of the learning opportunities. There have been some students who have really enjoyed the online experience, and others who have just despised it. The same with faculty.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right. And I think that there are certain situations where the remote technologies, I think, will continue to be a real benefit. Bringing in speakers. We've been able to bring in some fantastic speakers over the course of the last year who might not otherwise have been able to make their way all the way to Kingston. Some of them have been overseas or in very remote locations. Some just are so busy that getting their time is a challenge, and this technology can really help. So I don't see it going away, but I agree there are lots of people who really maybe never want to hear the word Zoom again. So it's going to be a challenge going forward. Okay, we have a question from Lara Luco, who is a graduate of our program. Will this experience inform how programs will be offered going forward? Will future students have the opportunity to decide to attend school in person or online? Will they receive the same quality of education? So, Lara, I think that this is building on the last answer. I think that we will have more opportunities to do things in a asynchronous or remote fashion. Whether we have entire programs that are remote and online, well, that's something that we have to talk about. And I think that students and staff and faculty all need to be involved in that discussion. There may be some tremendous opportunities to do that. Whether or not we go forward really depends on the appetite and the demand from people to do that.
Yeah, we're certainly looking at how can we do that. I also think this is a question about access. How can we provide access to a Queen's education? How can we think differently about how we can deliver our classroom outside of the 12 hours, 3-hour per week session? I think that there's so much of our education colleagues who have shown us different kinds of ways we can deliver pedagogy that are really effective. And the pandemic has sort of forced sort of a reckoning, or some ways to be thinking through how we might be able to do some of this.
That's exactly right. And so it's a great question, Lara, and I'm really interested to see how things develop. I think that there's some tremendous opportunities for us to use these tools as we go forward. Ajay Agarwal is asking, how prepared are we to go to in-person for the next academic year and then pivot to remote should something unforeseen happen in August?
Well, I certainly am interested in creating the conditions so that if we have to pivot, we can pivot back remote. I think it's really important, as I said, about how we're able to expand and contract. So what can we contract to do the in-person? So we're thinking about the big lectures. People have put a lot of material together to deliver that. And then how do we do the in-person tutorial? because still, if we have the 2-meter distancing, if we have the mask, all of these things play a huge role in what the experience is going to look like. Certainly when Central was making decisions about the fall, this was in February, trying to put that forward, and then now we've had this next wave. So my position is that we are trying to get people in back, but we're certainly trying to create the conditions that it's so much easier to go remote. I don't really want to create the conditions where people have to move back in those kinds of ways. So how are we thinking through how to deliver our curriculum in case we have to bring everybody, we have to go remote?
Yeah, and the prime overriding concern here is the health and safety of our community, our students and our staff and our faculty, but also the ability of our students to progress. We don't want to create a situation where time is lost and where they are not moving along the lines, and so we're working really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, we've got a few more questions, and we're starting to get towards the end of the hour. I think this next one is a relatively easy one. Will the university provide computer tools at the best price to do online learning for the students? The quick answer to that is I'm not sure that Queen's could offer computer equipment cheaper than some of the big providers that are out there now. Things have gotten so inexpensive, relatively speaking, that it'd be hard for us to come up with something cheaper. What we can do, though, is provide support for students that may find themselves in a situation where they can't access the right technology. That's become less of a problem over the years, but it's not a problem that's disappeared. And I know that individual units will step forward if somebody is in a position that they simply don't have the right kind of computer to be able to do the work, or the right kind of access to the internet to be able to do the work. We've struggled with that a little bit this year, particularly when so many of our students are remote. But certainly going forward, we continue to provide as much support as possible. And then a comment from David Lindsay. Great conversation, thank you. The conversation's focused on lessons learned, but could we speak for a moment about what opportunities may have been uncovered and what new opportunities may exist for Queen's and maybe the whole post-secondary sector over the next few years?
Thanks, David, for that question. In the end, I think there's way more opportunity for collaboration across the institutions. I also think that something that is really important is the infrastructure that we have. We need to think differently about what kind of infrastructure we need to support learning. I also think that and the technology. I think that the other opportunities that we have is about how we make our curriculum and change our curriculum that can be more portable, adaptable, flexible. So I think about things like how we could teach a course for one week, how we could teach in different kinds of ways. So that's where I see some of the opportunities is about how the technology has created some opportunities for flexibility around how we could deliver our curriculum and where we can deliver it. So I think that these are some real potential and some possibilities. And the other thing too, like simple things that Warren alluded to. I was a former dean of graduate studies, and I was always shocked that people weren't using the technology to bring in an external examiner. Now no one is questioning that. Now our students are getting access to some amazing external examiners that before required you to fundraise $5,000 and do 3 different talks in order to get you. So I think those are who we have access to and how we could better, I think, collaborate and provide access to such a wider range of researchers and scholars and students in different places.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think that the idea of micro-credentials and new delivery options for some of those credentials is one of the biggest opportunities that really has come into clear focus through the pandemic. The nice thing about these credentials is that not only could we reach out to a much broader range of students, and diversify our student pool and give new opportunities to people to get into these types of higher education. But we can really take advantage of some of these technologies that are out there in using or in delivering this. So there are some synergies there that we're really starting to see the opportunities unfolding now. It has been a little bit hard to focus on that future opportunity, or even a couple of years away when there's been so much happening day to day. But we are starting to get a little bit more horizon, a little bit more view, and I can see lots of chances. Yeah.
And David, the other thing I think is really important that I think we're seeing a significant shift is how we talk about mental health and the relationship between mental health and pedagogy and research and the way that we do things. So I think that there's a lot of potential around changing the conversation and addressing it in a more intentional way across student, staff, and faculty.
Okay, so we just have a few more questions and we just have a few more minutes. David Gordon's asking if we're considering a requirement that all students be vaccinated for the fall. And that's a tricky one. I'm not sure that we've gotten to that point in the conversation. Barbara, I don't know if you've got any.
Yeah, I think it's a human rights issue. I don't know if we can make it mandatory, but I certainly know that actually I have a response from the provost on that that I can put in the that David, I'll share with you. If others are interested, just email me and I will share with you his response to the compulsory vaccination. Yeah. Sorry, I just don't want to misrepresent.
No, it's an important question, and as we get a little bit more clarity and we find that out, we'll share that.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave the anonymous question for a second. David asks, do the new online techniques mean that Queen's will compete with global universities such as Harvard and Oxford, and what are the long-term consequences? One of the things that I would say about that is that the great fear of MOOCs, massive open online courses, which really came about 10, 15 years ago, it never realized its potential because students still gravitate towards the in-person experience, I think. And we're really talking about ways to augment that rather than replace it wholesale. So I'm less concerned personally that Harvard and Oxford are going to take a monopoly on excellent education. I think we provide excellent education, and that we can certainly provide awesome opportunities for our students. And then maybe the last question before we sign off, will Queen's be providing assistance so that our senior staff can have bookshelves? I think that one's for you, Barbara.
I haven't been asked that question yet, but I know that you. Yeah, not right now. I don't know I'm going to be providing it, but.
I think that they're talking about the stack of books beside you.
Oh.
I think that's where that's going. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, actually, normally I don't sit by my books. I have another thing because I'm just looking. This is our household books. Anyway, but it's a safety issue beside. Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Thanks.
I don't think it was
perfectly clear. You guys could see me be, what a way to go. The books fell on the dean. That would be a good way for me to go. Right. Anyway, thank you for caring about that.
Yes. So with this, I'm going to wrap up our Q&A and I'm going to wrap up this session. I want to thank you, Barbara, for taking time out of your schedule to take part in this. I know that everybody online has enjoyed this and learned a lot. I want to reiterate my thanks to Jen Hosek and to Chris Cornish. I didn't say this at the opening, but Chris Cornish has really done so much work behind the scenes to make this entire series work. And I'd be highly remiss if I did not say thank you to him and to the other staff. While the Contagion Culture series is now going to go on hiatus through the summer, there are still policy talks coming up, including a talk by Jody Wilson-Raybould that is coming up in mid-May. So please check our website, the SPS website, and there's lots of information about everything that's upcoming. Have a very safe and happy rest of April, and we'll look forward to reconnecting with you all at various points through the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye now.
All right. Bye-bye.